Sandra, thank you. Good evening. Welcome to Special Report. I'm Brett Baer. Breaking tonight, history. Fox News has learned from two law enforcement sources that a grand jury in New York City has indicted former President Donald Trump. This is the first former president or sitting president to face criminal charges. The precise charges not currently known, but the case is focused on a hush money payment to a porn actress during his 2016 campaign. This is a moment that will shake up the 2024 race, but again, is historic. We've never seen anything like this before. Let's get the latest now from senior correspondent Laura Engel, live in New York. Good evening, Laura.
Good evening, Brett. And as you can see there, our cameras are downtown at that courthouse. Fox News can confirm that a Manhattan grand jury has voted to indict former President Donald Trump, as you mentioned, the first former U.S. president to be charged criminally. The 23 grand jurors have been listening to evidence since January on Trump's role in hush money payments to former porn star Stormy Daniels. Trump has denied having an affair with Daniels and any wrongdoing, but his former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen has testified that he paid Stormy Daniels $130,000 to not speak about her relationship with the former president, and that Trump reimbursed him for that payment. Earlier this week, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker testified for a second time. Pecker is believed to have played a key role in connecting Cohen and Daniels. The National Enquirer bought the rights to two stories of women claiming they had affairs with Trump but never published those stories, a practice called catch and kill. Now, during a rally in Waco Saturday, Trump, who is again running for president, claimed he's under investigation for something that is not a crime, not a misdemeanor, not an affair. The felony indictment is under seal, and we expect to get more details on the charges in the coming days. Trump's attorneys will likely negotiate with the district attorney some sort of plan to have the former president surrender and be arraigned in downtown Manhattan. A lawyer for Trump told us that she doesn't know when he would surrender. Now, Trump is also facing three other criminal investigations, including efforts to overturn the 2020 election, keeping classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, and the January 6th Capitol riot. We will bring you more as we get it here in New York. Brett.
Okay, Laura, thank you. Let's go to Fox News chief legal correspondent and anchor of Fox News Sunday, Shannon Bream. Good evening, Shannon. Just moments ago, Eric Trump relaying that this is a third world prosecutorial misconduct, reacting to the word of the indictment. It is shocking, and it is not something that I think people expected at 5:28 on a Thursday after what we've been seeing in recent days.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is the first of its kind. This is the first time in history we are indicting a former president. So we are in totally new territory here. And Alvin Bragg has been warned by people right, center, and left that they are worried that what he's done with this case is going to look like nothing but political maneuvering when it comes time to actually get a conviction. An indictment is one thing, a conviction is another. You heard the former president talk about this in Waco. He says there's a new tool in the bag against me. It is prosecutorial discretion. Nobody wants to be indicted, but he is certainly going to know how to turn this to his advantage. At CPAC a few weeks ago, he said he would never drop out of the race if indicted, and he also predicted it would help his numbers, which has been the case as we've been waiting for this over the last few weeks. Remember, the feds passed on this case. They looked into it. They decided they couldn't prosecute it and decided not to move forward with it. So Alvin Bragg has got critics on both sides of this who think it is not a good move. If you don't land that conviction, the president is only going to be able to make his case even more full-throatedly that this was purely political. Legal scholars across the board say this is a very unique way that he's going about this legal theory and trying to get the president convicted. We'll see if it works. It'll be up to New York jurors now.
All right, Shannon, stand by if you would. Let's bring in George Washington University Law School professor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, heard some reaction from you. It is quite something to see this moment, and it's really historic, this moment that we're facing.
It is. It's historic. It's not necessarily good history that is being made. It's not that I oppose the indictment of a former president. I don't even oppose the indictment of a sitting president on constitutional basis. But this indictment, if it is reportedly following the theories that we've been talking about, is political. It's a raw political prosecution. Now, the indictment may come out with a crime that none of us have heard of, but for many months, this bootstrapping theory has been put out there. This idea that you could take a misdemeanor under New York law that has expired, that has a 2-year statute of limitations, and revive it by connecting it to a federal crime, in this case, the federal election violation. Now, there's a host of problems with that. First of all, it's a federal crime. The Department of Justice chose not to prosecute. The Department of Justice chose not to prosecute. Bragg's own predecessor declined to prosecute. But he is attempting to bootstrap that federal crime into a state case. And if that is the basis for the indictment, I think it's rather outrageous. I think it's legally pathetic.
Looking live at Mar-a-Lago, Palm Beach, residence for the former president. I want to read just a paragraph from the New York Times documenting of this in this story. It says, on Thursday, the 3 lead prosecutors on the Trump investigation walked into the building where the grand jury was sitting in the minutes before the panel was scheduled to meet at 2 p.m. One of them carried a copy of the penal law with Post-it notes visible, which was likely used to read the criminal statutes to the grand jurors before they voted. About 3 hours later, the prosecutors walked into the court clerk's office through a back door to begin the process of filing the indictment. As you rightly point out, Jonathan, the federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York chose not to go down this road with this case. The Federal Election Commission chose not to go down this road with this case. And then Alvin Bragg himself, as district attorney when he first took office, did not put a hold indefinitely on going down this road, but then revived it and talked publicly about that.
Yeah, and part of the problem, Brett, is that you had Bragg throw a flag on this case, which was the right thing to do. And then his 2 lead prosecutors resigned in protest. And one of them took the, in my view, outrageous step of writing a book about the investigation, which was still ongoing. The subject of his book was an individual who hadn't been convicted or charged. And so this book really ramped up the pressure on Bragg. But the other interesting thing about this is that there's a good reason why the Department of Justice did not prosecute this case, because it's been down this road before. It tried a case against former Democratic presidential candidate John Edwards, arguing that hush money paid to another woman who bore a child out of that relationship was in fact a campaign violation. That was a much stronger case, but they lost. And the reason they lost is because even if you can bootstrap that dead misdemeanor into something alive, you're essentially arguing a federal case that the Department of Justice declined. But it's also a case that requires you to show, if that is the basis of this indictment, that Trump's his sole motive for paying this money or having third parties pay it was for the election. Well, that's the problem from Edwards. There's a host of reasons why a celebrity and a married individual would want to hush up an affair, particularly with a porn star.
Yeah, I want to talk a lot about the process here and the negotiation that's going to happen, how the handover, the dealing with the Secret Service, the fingerprinting, the photograph. We've been through kind of speculation about this. But one last thing on the legal case. You talked about how this is new as far as its construct. And judges would have to evaluate that not only first on the case itself, but then if you got to a conviction, on an appeal that could last for a very long time. Meantime, there are other federal cases that perhaps are stronger if you are really going after the former president. The federal case in Georgia about election interference, and not to mention the special counsel and the January 6th investigation.
Yeah, and look, Bragg is clearly counting on a motivated judge and a motivated jury. You couldn't pick a better jurisdiction. But if he's using the bootstrap theory, which is the only one that's been discussed publicly, that is unprecedented. And I expect that New York judges will have the same reaction of many of us, including people on the left, that this doesn't read right. This is not, under Bragg's theory, he can take any unproven federal crime and revive a long dead misdemeanor and turn it into a felony. That's going to really, raise concerns for a number of judges. But once it gets to the appellate level, he's going to have a particularly difficult time, in my view.
Jonathan, thank you. Stand by if you could. Let's bring in senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram. Has some reaction early on from Capitol Hill. Chad.
Good evening, Brett. I'm going to start with just a one-word statement from Jim Jordan, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and he says that this is, quote, outrageous. That's what the press release said. That's the only word on the statement, just says outrageous. We've also heard from Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona, somebody who has been a staunch defender of the former president. He says that this is Trump derangement syndrome. Meantime, on the other side of the aisle, you have Pete Aguilar. He's the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and he says it's long overdue for the American people to see him be held accountable. Let's bring him to justice. Tom Tillis, Republican senator from North Carolina, says that this indictment doesn't pass the smell test. And then Adam Schiff, the former chairman of the Intelligence Committee, also he was the lead impeachment manager during the first impeachment trial. He says that this is deeply and fundamentally necessary to preserve the rule of law. Now, tomorrow was the deadline for these three House committee chairs. I mentioned Jim Jordan. We also had Brian Stile. He's the chair of the House Administration Committee, which has jurisdiction over federal elections, and also James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, who deals with the Oversight Committee. They had another deadline for tomorrow to get information from Alvin Bragg. They want to know what money is being spent on this investigation. They also want to know if he's been talking to the Justice Department. They want to understand the scope. They're saying, look, you're a local DA in one borough in Manhattan, New York. How can you deal with a former president of the United States and somebody who is a candidate for president in 2024? In reaching out in the past 30, 40 minutes here, I'm told here on Capitol Hill with some senior sources on the Republican side of the aisle that they had no heads up. One term that was used on me is that they were digesting this in real time. And I also reached out to a senior Democrat on the other side of the aisle, and they said they were not going to comment on this until they actually saw official paperwork from the DA. So Democrats, to some degree, and we saw this a couple of weeks ago, Brett, when there was this, swirl, this conjecture that it was imminent that there was going to be an indictment here, that Democrats were more than happy just to kind of sit this out and let Republicans go to bat for the president. They were kind of viewing this from a political lens or through a political lens and say, look, if you guys want to go and defend former President Trump, somebody who's been through 2 impeachment trials, the riot, all these other things here, go do it. We're just going to sit that out and let the American people decide that. So the reaction coming in here on Capitol Hill. I should note that just a couple of hours ago, this was the final session for 2 weeks. We're on the Easter Passover recess here, and the Capitol is basically a ghost town after about 3:30, 4 o'clock. There's nobody here. That would be a different scene. You would have press conferences, people chasing, reporters chasing members up and down the hall, but nobody is here. Everybody has gone home. They went to the airport. They got on the train. And so all this reaction is kind of delayed. It's going to be a slow reaction here from Capitol Hill because nobody is on Capitol Hill right now, Brett.
Yeah, reporters like Chad up on Capitol Hill call that the jailbreak when all the congressmen and senators run out of Capitol Hill for the recess, and it's a mass exodus, Chad. But just moments ago, Byron Donalds, congressman from Florida, put out today's political indictment of former President Trump is a dark day in American history and a threat to our republic by Alvin Bragg and the Democratic Party machine. It's unfathomable to me that this could happen in America. This is political persecution that must not stand. If Congress, quickly, Chad, is looking at this already, how does that factor into what we may be experiencing now? Anytime Congress, it's not usual to go into the affairs of a district attorney, and yet they were already going down that road. But now with this indictment, does it speed it up? What happens?
That's unclear, and that's one of the things I was trying to find out. I don't think they really know how to react. As I said, that was the deadline. You can bet your bottom dollar that those Republicans will say, look, we think this is a problem to go down this road. But, Alvin Bragg, there were kind of 2 volleys, Wimbledon-esque back and forth between the House committee chairs and Alvin Bragg over the past 7-8 days. And Alvin Bragg saying, look, you don't have jurisdiction here. It is inappropriate. It is improper for you to get involved in a criminal federal investigation that I'm conducting in New York City. Historically, Congress has stayed out of those matters, and that's why Alvin Bragg said that this was so extraordinary. You had people like Jamie Raskin, the Democrat from Maryland, who's the top Democrat on the Oversight Committee, saying as much and kind of going to bat for Bragg. So it's unclear, and partly it's unclear, Brett, because this is such uncharted territory. We have never really been here before with an indicted president, let alone with a House committee or a trio of House committees investigating the DA at that point and wanting him to come and testify, telling him that he is not immune from a subpoena to appear for a deposition or at a hearing. And so nobody quite knows where to take this right now on Capitol Hill. It's going to take a little bit of time to let the salt kind of settle.
Yeah. All right, Chad, program live on the Hill, an empty Hill. Chad, thank you. Moments ago, we have not heard from the Trump campaign as of yet, but we have heard from the PAC, the Political Action Committee, Make America Great Again. This is a statement saying this is not an indictment of a crime. There was no crime. Instead, this is news of an indictment of a failed nation. President Trump is promising to peacefully end the war in Ukraine, dismantle the deep state, and save our country by putting America first. For that, the political elites and power brokers have weaponized government to try and stop him. They will fail. He will be reelected in the greatest landslide in American history, and together we will all make America great again. This is Taylor Budowich, CEO of Make America Great Again, Inc.